Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Steve.
So today we're finishing off the book of James. And so we're going to be looking at James 5, 7 through 20. But you don't have to turn there right now. We're going to enter into it a little bit slowly. But so to start this off, because we're talking about James, and James is a very serious book. And so it feels like the conclusion for this serious book should be serious. And it definitely is. But I want to tell a little bit of a story about something that happened to me this week. Because it was so fitting, it had to be. So this week, I got to apologize to someone. And not a little bit either, right? So this week, some stuff had happened at work. And basically, I had to go to one of my employees, and basically with my hat in my hands and scuffing my feet like a schoolboy, I had to go and apologize to him. Because I had really snapped at him. And, to be fair, right, I had snapped at him because some things at work had gone on, and basically my entire team, of which were people, had done some things that made me look incredibly stupid. And it was very embarrassing for me, and the way that they behaved and all this. And so and it really was very disrespectful. So it made me very angry. And I'm right at the height of when I'm the most angry about this. This other guy comes up who wasn't really related to the situation either, which, again, to my discredit. So he comes up and he basically starts kind of prodding me about the situation, just trying to goad me a little bit, because he just was. And I was mad, and so I really snapped at him, right? And I said, I didn't insult him or anything, but I really was I just shut him right down, and I was very mean to him. So then I had to go back, and a day later, I was like, wow, he really had that coming. Day and a half later, I was like, well, maybe that was a little bit. And by 2 days later, I was like, yeah, I really should not have said that to him. That was not called for at all. And he wasn't even really a part of the situation entirely. He was just coming to tease me about it, I guess. So, and it just really hit me, how hard is it to control what we say? How hard it is to stop ourselves from this gossip, from snapping out at people angrily, from talking bad about people behind their backs, from spreading lies. It's so incredibly difficult. And no matter how hard we try to hold it back or pack it in, it seems like all it takes is a little bit of fear, maybe a little bit of anger, a little bit of uncomfortableness, and suddenly it just all starts spilling out again. And it's hard. There's no way around it. It's difficult, right? What we live with. But the thing is, what we can start to do, and again, what all of James has been about up till now, and continues to be through its conclusion, is that it's possible to replace these negative actions we have, right? These negative behaviors, these old sinful behaviors we have, with good, God-centered, Christ-focused behaviors. But, okay, we're human, right? And if you've ever seen anyone try to learn anything, or worse, if you've ever tried to explain something to somebody else, you know that it's hard for us to learn how to do things without seeing someone else do it first. Try to imagine if you work, or if you're raising a kid, or cooking something, or anything like that. Imagine if the person had never done it before, or by nature really had no idea what you were talking about, and you're just going to explain it to them. That's very difficult. And you're going to forget things, you're going to forget little details, and they're going to misremember details, and next thing you know, they're going to be doing something totally different from what you originally explained. Whereas you can go, and even the most complicated tasks, you can do it in front of someone, and they're going to pick it up just like that. When you think about, with little kids, it's a perfect example. How complicated is human speech? But they learn it just because we talk all the time, right? We do it, we demonstrate it for them, and so because of that, they're able to quickly pick it up. It's just the way we're wired. It's very easy to learn things when you see somebody else doing them first. But, and now thankfully, Jesus came, and he came down to earth to give us that perfect example. problem is we don't get to see that example today, right? Like, I can't go and say, like, I want to watch Jesus on TV living through his life, and then because of that, watch and know exactly how I should respond to all these circumstances. Unfortunately, we don't have that. What we do have, obviously, is a huge set of stories about how he reacted in different circumstances, how he reacted when he was frustrated, how he reacted when he was tempted, how he reacted when he was, unjustly accused and dragged off to be murdered for a crime he didn't commit. So we have those stories that can give us basically the closest thing we're going to get to the example of how we should behave, and that's why they're so powerful. There's these powerful stories that we can relate to. So we already had Jenny read 1 Peter 2, 18 through 23. We're going to read it again because I want you to listen in here. It's easy to listen, and there's a lot of concepts happening, but there's a very specific concept in here for how Jesus is reacting in the circumstances that he's put in, right? So it says, 1 Peter 2, 18 through 23. You who are slaves must submit to your masters with all respect. And really, we could read this today, you who are employees, submit to your employers with all respect. Do what they tell you, not only if they are kind and reasonable, but even if they are cruel. For God is pleased when, conscious of his will, you patiently endure unjust treatment. Of course, you get no credit for being patient if you are beaten for doing wrong. But if you suffer for doing good and endure it patiently, God is pleased with you. For God called you to do good even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example, and you must follow in his steps. He never sinned, nor ever deceived anyone. He did not retaliate when he was insulted, nor threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. I'm going to read that section again, right? So you can hear this example, right? He is your example, and you must follow in his steps. He never sinned, nor ever deceived anyone. He did not retaliate when he was insulted, nor threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. It's fairly straightforward, right? Like that. There's a perfect example, and you can read the actual stories. This is kind of more the summary of it. But you can read the stories of how he did those things, of how he didn't reply back, of how he controlled. And notice most of these are verbal things. They're about controlling the tongue, right? He didn't retaliate when he was insulted. Most retaliations when you're insulted are to insult someone back. He didn't threaten revenge. He didn't verbally threaten revenge. He didn't deceive anyone. Pretty much the only way to deceive someone is to tell a falsehood. And so, like, here we get these perfect examples of how he was able to control his tongue that way. But what we're talking about is the end of James. This was just kind of trying to wedge us in. So let's look at James 5, 7 through 20. Now, this is a big chunk of text, but what I want you to listen through here is how I really want to focus on how you can control the tongue. And sort of the way that James, this whole book, he always says, don't do this, instead do this. Because he knows that you need to replace an action. To be able to really replace it in your life, you need to not just stop doing something, you have to have something else you're going to do instead. So listen, as I'm going to read through this, and maybe we'll pull it up, of exactly how he threads that through. Dear brothers and sisters, be patient as you wait for the Lord's return. Consider the farmers who patiently wait for the rains in the fall and the spring. They eagerly look for the valuable harvest to ripen. You too must be patient. Take courage, for the coming of the Lord is near. Don't grumble about each other, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. For look, the judge is standing at the door. For examples of patience and suffering, dear brothers and sisters, look at the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. We give great honor to those who endure under suffering. For instance, you know about Job, a man of great endurance. You can see how the Lord was kind to him at the end, for the Lord is full of tenderness and mercy. But most of all, my brothers and sisters, never take an oath by heaven or earth or anything else. Just say a simple yes or no, so that you will not sin and be condemned. Are any of you suffering hardships? You should pray. Are any of you happy? You should sing praises. Are any of you sick? You should call for the elders of the church to come and pray over you, anointing you with oil in the name of the Lord. Such a prayer offered in faith will heal the sick, and the Lord will make you well. And if you've committed any sins, you will be forgiven. Confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The earnest prayer of a righteous person has great power and produces wonderful results. Elijah was as human as we are, and yet when he prayed earnestly that no rain would fall, none fell for 3.5 years. Then, when he prayed again, the sky sent down rain, and the earth began to yield its crops. Dear brothers and sisters, if someone among you wanders away from the truth and is brought back, you can be sure that whoever brings a sinner back from wandering will save that person from death and bring about the forgiveness of many sins. Obviously, there's a lot there. And what he does is he threads in so many different topics so that almost like a tapestry, he threaded throughout that whole section how to control the tongue. A set of actions that you can use to replace negative behaviors with the tongue and replace them with these good behaviors. So what are those behaviors, right? He starts off, actually, and the more you look at like a big section like this, you can start to see the rhythm of it. It's almost like poetry the way he wrote it. Because he starts off with 2 don'ts, right, in that section. He says, there's 2 things he doesn't want you to do, and then he gives you 5 things that he does want you to do. So sometimes it's almost, you can almost see the ratio he sees there. He's going to tell us not to do 2 things, but to replace these 2 sinful behaviors that are natural in us with these 5 Christ-like behaviors. So what are the 2 sinful behaviors? Well, don't grumble about each other or you will be judged. It's fairly straightforward. We actually talked about this, actually the last time I talked, because we were talking about not judging others or you will be judged, right? And so that's very straightforward. Don't talk about people behind their backs. Don't put other people down verbally to make yourself feel better. And then he says, never take an oath by heaven or earth. Just let your yes be yes. So this is a little bit strange, but like if you can basically imagine that why he said this is for a long time there was a tradition where people would kind of make these promises that they knew they weren't going to break. Right? They'd be like, oh yeah, I really want to come to your party tomorrow, but I have this other thing, right? Where you kind of like these half promises, or that people would make promises like, oh well, according to if by the earth, I'll try to be there. And that's not right. Like if you're going to tell somebody you're going to do something, you do it, right? Or, oh yeah, I'll try to make it next week. You're not really going to try to make it, right? Like usually when people say that nowadays, they kind of, they mean they're not really going to do the thing. But here he says, it's like, don't bother playing those games. Don't do any of those things. If you're going to say you're going to do something, do it. And if you're not going to do it, tell them you're not going to do it. Straightforward. Which, that one's tricky because it's actually a don't do and a do this instead. So that was kind of tricky. But then there's the 5 things he does say to do, which are separate, right? He says, if you're suffering, you should pray. Which, is interesting to me because when I was livid at work last week, that was not what I was doing, right? I was skulking and I was thinking about the situation and I was stewing on things. I was definitely not praying, but I really should have been. And if you're happy, you should sing praises to God. Oftentimes, like when I'm happy, I want to tell everyone else. I want to tell my friends, call my mom up on the phone, talk to my wife, text some buddies. The last thing I'm thinking about is, oh, you know what? Really, the only reason I have these blessings in my life, the only reason I'm really probably still alive, is because of God. I should be thanking Him. And thanking Him and praising Him for the amazing blessings He's given me. And so, like, if I'm happy, I should be sharing that with Him. If you're sick, it even says, like, you can call and ask people to come pray over you. Or if you see somebody else sick, you can go and pray over them. if you've sinned, you should confess that to others. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to confess it to the preacher, but that means you can confess it to another believer. You can say, look, someone I trust, I really messed up this way, please pray for me. Please, I want to confess this sin. And then finally, the last one, and this is a little bit sneaky, but is bringing others back to the truth. There's a good action you can do. If you see someone wandering away, you go talk to them. Maybe you take them out for coffee a couple times. Maybe you go out and just walk around, talking. Maybe you look for a way to invite them over for a movie night, and then you have a chat afterwards. Right? What you try to do though is you have an action to try to go and bring that person back to the truth. It's a good action you can replace a negative one with. And this model is very simple. It's very similar to what we've seen before. But the more we focus on doing these good Christ-like actions, I think the less we're going to have these old sinful actions in our lives. I mean, really, the way that we sin is it's reactive, right? It's not even an action. It's just, oh, I'm angry. Somebody made me sad. Somebody scared me. And so we react, and almost always we react in a sinful way. What we have to do is start training ourselves to instead act in a Christ-like way. So we've talked about these God-centered actions and how can we start to introduce them more. And previously, right, we talked about not judging others, not gossiping. We've talked about doing more prayer. Another action that you even mentioned here, we talked about not loving money and instead giving it away. That was what we talked about last week. But there's one we haven't talked about here yet. This is interesting. So I was like, okay, let's talk about that a little bit more. And so it says in verse 13, "Are any of you happy? You should sing praises." And that's a very simple thing. It's simple in itself to think, okay, if I'm happy about something, or if I'm just having a good day, or if I'm excited, or if I'm thankful, I should be praising God and thanking Him for that. But it's a little trickier to do in practice. And also, too, especially, it can be very tricky to come and do that in practice here. Now, it's funny that I was going to say this today, because today this was a very good worship this morning, I thought. Actually, it was very good. And I feel like we came here, and as a congregation, we were loudly worshiping together. And that was amazing. So, but it's difficult sometimes to make a habit of that, right? Because, I mean, really, I think, especially the kind of idea of passively sitting back, that I think is our natural reaction. The first time I've gone to a new church, I almost always want to sit back and kind of watch. I don't know if I really want to engage yet. And that's okay for a period. But really, what we need to do is we need to start actively engaging and not making it a passive thing, but making it rather an active thing. And there's different ways to do that. I think it's totally possible to be actively engaging in worship, sitting quietly. I think that's totally reasonable to do. I also think it's totally reasonable to sing out loud, and to sing loudly as a group together as a congregation. But it's very much as a heart thing, is how is your heart dealing with it? Are you dealing with it in a passive way where you want to sit back and watch? Or are you dealing with it in an active way where you're here to worship Christ, and just to thank Him? And so what is the obedience here? And that we've been commanded, right? It's very clear that if we are happy, we should be singing praises. So really the way we can go about being obedient here is to do it. And to say, well, when we come, maybe if we don't feel like it, maybe if we're tired that day, maybe if we're, there's some reason, that's okay. And maybe we sit and pray about those things. But when we come here as a group, it's very important, and I think it's going to give us a much, much richer experience if we confidently worship together. It's largely, you see it throughout the entire Bible, tremendous amounts of examples of people corporately and loudly and without shame worshiping together. And there's plenty of reasons why we might not want to do those things. Why we might want to come and not necessarily worship. Like for me, honestly, most of the reasons are like if maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm distracted about things at home, maybe I'm thinking of, maybe I don't like a song. That one happens a lot. Maybe I don't like the words, or for whatever reason, maybe I feel uncomfortable singing out loud because I don't know anyone, or I don't like my voice. I still don't like my voice. But those things you notice, like the list of the reasons I give you for why I a lot of times keep quiet, those are reasons that are focused on me, right? I don't like the song. I don't like my voice. I feel uncomfortable. They're focusing entirely on myself rather than focusing on Christ. And like the point of coming here and corporately worshiping is to turn our focus away from ourselves and onto Christ and thanking Him. And I admit that's a very difficult thing to do. I don't think it's natural. It's very difficult for us to learn how to do that. But one of the ways we can practice that is by coming and practicing it. Right? We have a perfect opportunity here to come and practice together with a group of people who, I have a terrible voice, and I hope you guys don't care. And that's okay. Because you guys shouldn't be focusing on my voice. You should be focusing on worshiping Christ. Right? And like I definitely sometimes when I'm playing music I mess up, and I really hope I try not to, but I hope you guys don't care as much, because we should be focusing on Christ, and what we do is for Christ. And so actively coming forward and actively worshiping, it's going to make those things fall away. Suddenly the questions are not, do I feel like singing today? Do I feel like participating in worship? Do I feel like, even just worshiping silently? Instead, it's, what does Christ want me to do today? How can I thank Him for all the blessings He's given me right now? Like, how can I serve Him better in this group that we have? It's a very different, you're changing the focus. It's a very different mindset. And the good news here is, as a group, this is something I think we've been getting better at. And I think this is something that we, just over time, have been becoming more and more comfortable. We've been becoming more and more trusting of each other. And we're getting to the point where we can start focusing a little more on Christ and a little less on ourselves. So that's a good thing. But I think what we can do is, I think we can get better. Because I'm positive it's not going to be possible to get perfect. Right? So I know we can get better. Like, I know that what we can do is we can come in here and we can truly make it about Christ. About worshiping Him and praising Him and thanking Him for the immense blessings He's given us. And like, I firmly believe we can make this a place where we come and we all unashamedly worship together. Where when we're praying, we're all praying together. When there's scripture verse read, we're all letting that go into our hearts. When there's sermons preached, it's something that profoundly impacts us. When there's songs sung, it's something we can sing out, meditate on. Because that is when we get the full, rich experience that God intended for us. It's really exactly what we were made to do, is to worship Him. And I think when we can start even more to turn our passive reception and our passive just kind of waiting into something that's active. And then when we do that, we're going to get much, much more out of it. So I wanted to read, if you guys just want to come up, just to close here, I wanted to read a section out of 2 Timothy. And this is a little bit of a grim section, but it's not to scare us, right? It's to put the point on how serious this concept is. In 2 Timothy 3:1-5, he says, "You should know this, Timothy. In the last days there will be very difficult times. For people will love themselves and only love themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel and hate what is good. They will betray their friends, be reckless, be puffed up with pride, and love pleasure rather than God. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Stay away from people like that. We'll read that last verse again, verse 5. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Stay away from people like that. Like that's my concern, right? Like I read that and I was like, how many times have I come here and passively worshipped, especially like before I played specifically? I'd sit and I would passively worship, or I'd passively just observe, and I wouldn't actively do it. My heart would not be in it, right? I think that example is exactly how I used to behave. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. We have the choice right now, and starting right now, we have the choice to start this real religion. And this is what all of James has been about. You look all the way through James, James has set a tremendously high standard for us. James basically looks through the entire life of Christ, looks through the entire Old Testament, and says, well, okay, this would be the standard you have to meet. And it's higher than any of us are ever going to meet. But the point is that it points us, it gives us a goal to strive for. Not something we have to be depressed about, not something we have to be embarrassed about, but it's a goal we can strive for, to have this true religion, this wholehearted religion where we, instead of rejecting the power that could make us godly, where we embrace the power that could make us godly. Where we say we truly want to follow what Christ says, and so we take the steps necessary to do that. If you remember, throughout the whole book, he talks about endurance, he talks about faith, he talks about how to control the tongue is arguably the theme of the whole book. He talks about how to deal with money and not love it. This whole set of things. And now in conclusion, I'm kind of wrapping up with how we can worship, and how we can get a more full and rich worship. So we're going to sing the last two songs. And I want you to think this week, before we do that, how is your life living up to this very, very high standard that we have? Like, this is the goal we have. How are your actions reflecting that? Are there actions you could start to replace? Start to say, well, instead of getting angry and snapping at people at work, I'm going to walk off and I'm going to go pray about it. And say, God, I'm scared and I'm angry and I feel embarrassed. Instead of saying, I'm going to hoard up more money, well, this money is God's. God, what do you want me to do with it? So, we're going to sing the last two songs. And just today, I want us to start to practice. Today's the way we can start even more to turn around that story of getting better, we could get great. And so I want us to stand up and sing the last three songs together. And when we do, I urge you, focus on Christ. The worship we do here is to thank Christ for what he has given us, for his endless blessings. So let's sing out together with great joy for the tremendous blessings he's given us.